All right, I think we are live and ready to go. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I hope you all are buzzing from the energy of the last session the way that I am, and hearing from Andy and Dagan and Raj and Anand earlier today. I feel like there's a lot of great truths being spoken, and I hope this session can contribute to that as well. So I'm Katie Bunten-Wamaru from the African Visionary Fund. I'm actually standing in today for my incredible co-CEO, Ati Warku, who's sadly a bit under the weather. I'm also recovering from a cold, so if I sound a little sniffly, that's why, but I'm fine. And I did, unrelated to the session, want to say that I've talked to a lot of people recently about being sick or feeling a little run down. I think maybe we're having a collective moment of a really tough time in the world and kind of sprinting towards this hope and change that we all seek. So just wanted to put out some solidarity and collective care into the session and into the audience if that resonates with any of you. So for this session, I'm super excited. We have three incredible panelists, women I love and admire and consider dear friends, and incredible visionaries in their communities. And we're really excited to talk about proximity and action, emphasis on action. I think that these sessions this morning have been there's been a lot of calls to action. And when we think about the philanthropic sector in particular in the last 18 months, there's been a lot of talk about funding local leaders and getting more proximal and shifting power and decolonization. What does that actually look like to put into practice? And are we actually doing it? And so at the African Visionary Fund, we're really founded on the belief that the how of our funding matters as much as the funding itself. So we are an entity focused on shifting power and resources to incredible African visionaries like our panelists. And we believe that the how we get that money moving really matters. It matters that we're getting input from partners and being as equitable, inclusive, and participatory as possible. So before our second round of funding recently, we did a really participatory review of our grant-making criteria process. We're a very new entity. I'm sure we got many things wrong in that first round. How do we learn and get better and better each time? And all three of our incredible panelists participated in that review as either a current partner of the fund, a founding working group member, or an organization that made it to our finalists and then didn't get funded, which I think is a really important perspective for all funders to be getting. And so we're going to talk a lot about that process and broader themes about putting proximity into action. But I want to pause first and introduce each of our incredible panelists. And I'm going to have them introduce themselves because I think that they'll speak on their work far more eloquently than I ever could. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, a little bit about their work, and in 2 minutes or less say why proximity is important in your work. So Monica, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you, Katie. So my name is Monica Nyiraguhabwa, the Executive Director, Gallup Initiative Uganda, and we strive to amplify the voices of girls, especially from at-risk communities and slum communities. Just to answer the question around proximity, I believe proximity is important because as Gallup Initiative Uganda, that is what we live for. We are the community, and therefore it's important that whatever involves community transformation, we are part of the conversation, because we should appreciate that community needs keep shifting, keep changing, and therefore proximity means that you're able to adapt, you're able to listen, and you're able to respond in real time. That's why the issue of proximity is close to my heart, because without proximity, then we shall not be able to move forward in this work of social transformation.
Thanks, Monica. I love that. Françoise from Burundi, can we hear from you next?
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. My name is Françoise Nibizi. I'm the founder and executive director of SaCoDé. SaCoDé, we are based in Burundi. And for me, proximity really matters because I believe that to any work to be successful, someone needs to be closer in order to understand very well the context, to understand the culture, to understand also the systems in place, to understand the economical system, the political system, to understand the whole ecosystem, actually, to understand even the unspoken language. Because you can't really do, you can't be successful when you're doing a work in your community. Once in a community, in any community, once you really don't understand what's going on in that community. That's why proximity matters, because once you understand very well that community, you understand all the sides of the problems which are in that community, and you are able to find the right solutions to that community, which means once you manage to do a very nice baseline, because you know the community, you know the influencers, you know all the systems in place, you know even the unspoken language, you know the culture, it means whatever you're going to do, you're going to have the impact. That's why proximity really matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Françoise. And last but certainly not least, Linda.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Linda Kamau, and co-founder and managing director at AkiraChix, where we're building the leading source African female tech talent for the world. And I believe that proximity matters, and this is basically based on a personal experience. I'm a software engineer by trade, been in the industry for quite some time, working in different roles as an engineer, and finding myself as only the female engineer, either leading a team or just delivering the code. And so for me, looking at proximity, I look at it from an interesting angle of I know what I have gone through to just grow myself as a software engineer, and I believe that I am in the space that I can actually create change. And so in this case, I know where to knock doors and ask people questions, some that are tough questions, for instance, companies that probably do not have women in their tech teams. And so I believe that it's we need to, the person closest to the problem knows it better and can actually find solutions to solve it. And so I believe in investing in the people who are actually working on the problems or living the problems every single day. So yeah.
Thanks, Linda. I love that. It's close to an Ayanna Pressley quote that is my personal mantra. The people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. Big believer in that. So before we dive into kind of the nuts and bolts of our participatory review and what we learned, I feel like it's good to just ground in kind of the current state. Like I said in the beginning, and I'm a fundraiser most of the time, so I talk to a lot of funders. That's kind of my day job. I hear a lot about proximity and wanting to fund local leaders and how do I find them, and and kind of all of these discussions. We've all seen panels on it, and over the last year, a lot of talk and rhetoric, and sometimes public commitments. But is that really changing things on the ground for you all? Like, is your day-to-day experience of fundraising or looking for resources for your work or interacting with funders who are interested in your impact, has any of that actually shifted that experience? So Monica, I'll kind of start with you. Have you experienced that shift in the rhetoric, and has that actually changed your experience on the ground running your organization at all, or not?
Thank you. Maybe I'll start by appreciating the fact that our collaborators and partners appreciate this conversation, and that's why we are having this critical topic right now. So I would like to appreciate the fact that partners are beginning probably to listen, but from my own perspective, I think we all need to shift from talking to actually doing and actualizing all the conversations from the boardrooms and from the conferences and from the panels. It's important that we should be able to see a shift in funding significantly. Looking at the past 24 years, 24 months, for example, with COVID, I would say as an organization, we've really shouldered on existing networks that have been able to support us with unrestricted funding and biased funding. I can only imagine if this conversation was actually making significant change, then there would be so much happening. There would be so much response happening right now. So I believe that, yes, we are talking about it, which is a good thing, but we need more funders, more partners to come on board and appreciate that unrestricted funds and flexible funds are critical right now. We can only imagine with COVID, without flexibility, the issues on the ground are changing every day. It therefore calls for flexible solutions, even flexible funding. So I believe that we all can do something. It's important that we start to walk the talk.
I totally. Yeah.
I can add on to what Monica said. Yeah, I think the mantra last year almost from everyone was you need to pivot. You need to pivot for almost everyone in the world. And so most of us did that. We were pivoting because we relied heavily on physical interactions for our programs. And so we were trying our best to make sure that we can keep supporting the people who rely on us, and not just our beneficiaries, but even our own, employees that work in the organizations. And so for me, I kept asking ourselves, sure, the organizations are doing the work. We're putting in the work. We are pivoting, but are the funders pivoting? That was the question that I kept asking myself. And yeah, as much as we've been talking, the funders, most of them are not pivoting. They're still finding people even right now when you have to do due diligence and getting a new funder. And it takes months on months to just like get things rolling, from just being able to do like physical, people asking for physical due diligence. And you're like, we're still in a pandemic. There's no way we are discussing someone walking into the AkiraChix campus because we have students who don't live there in a bubble. And so just like not being able, like they're talking how we need to change, but then my question is, it's just not one-sided. It has to be all two-sided. The funders are changing, we are changing, and that means at the end of it all, it's more collaborative than it is just looking at us, the grantees, who have to actually change things to suit what the funder wants. So I think for me, I feel like, yes, the talk has been there. I think it's even been there before. It's been accelerated by the fact that there is a pandemic. But then we still are not seeing the action. I think a lot of it, we are still, as Monica said, relying on our connections. If it's not the Seagull Family Foundation, it's another network that you are in for introductions. But then, so things are still, I think they're going to take a while before they shift, but then it needs to also come from the funder side and not just from the grantee side.
I think I just wanted to express also my sincere gratitude to Seagull Family Foundations, to African Visionary Funds, to SaCoDé, to all those donors who really have put their trust. When I say trust, it's really very important. In any partnership, trust is the key. So I even wonder why those donors, they really want to give us their money and they don't trust us. It's really paradoxical. So, and I have realized those donors who give us their money and their trust, before the money, there is that trust. You even work harder to reach more milestones than what you have promised, because there is that trust and you really don't want to fail because there is that trust. I wish, as other people were talking today, they still need a huge amount of humility among some donors, just to trust us, because we really love our community. We know what to do among our community. We live in our community. We know right better than them the problems in our community. So they should trust us. And when I say trust, it doesn't mean that we do things in any management systems. We have to report, but I really don't like when you are in a stage of discussion and you see that the donor doesn't trust you. It really hurts. For me, I'm talking to donors. If there are really donors listening to me, can you please trust us? Thank you.
Thank you all. I knew there'd be a lot of truth bombs in this session, and it's already coming to fruition. And I think, I'll speak to that from I'm both a funder and a fundraiser, but we often use this statistic that 0.4% of all international funding goes to local organizations. And that's a statistic from 2017. In 2020, there was a report done at the end of the year, just looking at COVID funding. And I believe it was 0.7% of that COVID funding in 2020 went to local organizations. So your reality is the reality. All of this kind of rhetoric is not really gaining traction in action yet. Hopefully more and more. But I think acknowledging that and really speaking to that is important, because sometimes there can be a perception that because funders are talking about it, they're doing it, and then it doesn't need to be as much of a focus. It's as much of a funding gap and funding inequity as it's ever been. So shifting gears a little bit and thinking about this kind of participatory review process. And I think the way I see this so connected is that, just like you all were saying, particularly Françoise, you're saying funders don't know the problems of our communities the way we do. That to me is a very clear thing. Like, if I'm a funder, I live in rural New Hampshire now, thanks to the pandemic. And how can I, even though I've lived in East Africa, how can I actually know what's happening in your community right now if I'm not there, right? The only thing I can do is trust the leaders on the ground and help get them resources. And so oftentimes I think that funders don't have good feedback mechanisms with local leaders. And the burden of feedback is really heavily placed on grantees, right? So funders might ask for feedback, but do they action it? Is it participatory in nature, where it's not just, how are we doing, but what's wrong with our criteria? What did we do in our process that didn't work that we should change? And so at the African Visionary Fund, we did kind of our first round of funding earlier. We announced earlier this year, 2021, and we're about to start a second selection process. And so before that, we wanted to go back to everyone who participated in that first round and say, how did it go? What did we do wrong? Like, we want to learn. When you look at our grant making criteria, are there things that don't resonate with your experience on the ground? Are there things that are unclear that you're not sure why we're prioritizing? And so all of you participated in that process. And maybe starting with Françoise, what was it like to participate in that type of process? What was your experience? And maybe, have you participated in that kind of participatory grant making process before with other funders, and what that experience has been like?
Yeah, as I said before, I really like the way AVF trusted me. Many times I talk about trust. Trust is very important. And I enjoyed more during the process the fact that both of us, I mean the AVF and SaCoDé team, we had the same understanding. Actually, you asked me questions and I told you how I think I will resolve those problems in my community. You listened to me, and that is very, very important, because we've got those donors who don't even, and because you need that money, the talk is even very difficult. For me, it means they don't trust you. They bring you something which you never participated in it. But with aviation, and I really love the way we had the same understanding in the process for reaching and measuring that impact we really wanted among my community. It's very unfortunate that some donors, they want the impact, they want numbers, and you just wonder, are they numbers of trees? They are numbers of human beings. And human being, it doesn't mean, you have really to know first that human being. What is it very important? What is the priority for that person, so that we can really relieve that person? We can fight that poverty. So it's very unfortunate that some donors really don't understand, listen to us. So I was very happy during the whole process because AVF listened to me, and they were very cooperative, and they even accepted my suggestion. For example, I told them, in order to be able to measure very well the impact, we need to do a baseline study. It's going to cost us money, but at least we know where we're going from, and we know what we really want, because we're going to set up indicators, and those indicators are going to help us monitor the real impact we're looking for. And at the end, we will say, now we have got that impact because we know the baseline, where we came from. So I was really happy for the AVF to accept the whole process, because it's going to be a very nice partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Françoise. And before we open up to others, I just wanted to say, as the funder in that process, we had to, something that I think funders don't always realize is that kind of process takes a lot of time. And like Françoise says, takes trust, and it takes deep listening, and more than just kind of a survey, like getting into conversation, and being willing to slow down our own processes and goals in order to take in that feedback and action it. And I think Françoise is having a little internet challenges, but Monica and Linda, maybe one of you want to jump in, because I wanted to kind of shift a little bit, thinking about these types of participatory processes and trust-based relationships, and we might have Françoise back. What is because I have had funders say to me things like, well, the funding is still getting there, so why does it matter how it gets there, right? Like if we're both giving a grant to SaCoDé at the same amount, and I do it in restricted money towards a project, and African Visionary Fund's doing multi-year unrestricted in a participatory way, why does, if the money's the same, why does it matter? So what I would ask Françoise is, what is the impact of these types of trust-based, deep listening, participatory partnerships with funders, and how do those equitable funding relationships actually accelerate your impact and affect the work you do with the community that you work in?
Yeah, first of all, once you know what motivated a donor to give you money, I mean, like, let's say that donor is giving you money because they really like your cause. It means the impact is not going only to be from that money they are giving you. Those donors are the ones who even will connect you to other donors, so that you can make huge impact. So, which means once a donor has really trusted you, gives you money, it means you're going to work really very hard so that you maintain that partnership. It's very important. In any relationship, once there is trust, anyone can work hard so that that relationship can stay for long. And I was very grateful for unrestricted funding from AVF, unrestricted funding for our SIGO Family Foundation, and multi-years, because those are the guys who really believe in me. They believe in what I'm fighting for. And that's why you can't say you have given here and say you're going to see the impact really. But when you say to implementers that you're giving them money for 3 years, multi-years, that's where you know after 3 years, you know you're going to have that impact. And for that trust I was talking about, it's always good, even for grantees, even though they are trusting us, it's good also for us to be able to report when it's necessary, to do what we had access to do, so that you work very well. And as I was saying, donors connect you to other donors, and that's when you have huge impact, more than what you had planned before. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to add that when we do have equitable funding relationships, you find that it facilitates mutual learning and feedback, because oftentimes the feedback is only to the grantee partners. But with equitable funding, we believe that the feedback equally goes to the funder, just like we had an opportunity to give feedback to the grant making process of the African Visionary Fund, which I felt was very critical in ensuring that the realities of visionaries are actually integrated in the grant making process. But I also feel that it helps prevent organizations from stagnation. Imagine when you're given unrestricted funds for 3 years, you're able to plan, you're able to achieve real change, because change doesn't happen in 6 months. It doesn't happen in 12 months. For most of us, we do scaling work, but we scale deeply. And when you're scaling deeply, then you require time. You know, like Françoise was saying, that it's not just about numbers, it's about the community's transformation. So I feel that equitable funding ensures that organizations don't get stagnated. Organizations don't get to a point where they're in a drought, because like someone mentioned in the comments, you find that as you grow, you get to a point where no one is willing to invest funding because you're at a particular budget. There will be more funding for startups. So sometimes you're wondering, what should a visionary do at that level of growth? So I feel that this conversation needs to keep happening, and equitable funding, which, you know, takes on the feedback from both the doer and the funder, is very critical in this space.
Thanks, Monica. Linda, I know you're off video, but might be on the call on audio. Do you want to try to jump in?
Yeah, I hope everyone hears me. But yeah, I think for me, it's just looking at what multi support does to an organization, multi unrestricted, because most of us, when I look at the kind of work that we're doing, and especially when I look at the work of AkiraChix, we're doing work that we don't have any other people who have done this before. And so we pretty much are the ones creating the template on how to do this kind of work. And so you have to, every day is a day to do something different, something to improve on the program, to improve on everything that we're doing. And the only way we can keep innovating, which I think is a key aspect to any organization, is when you have support, then in terms of multi-year grant funding, because then you don't have to worry on what will happen tomorrow. Like you know that at least next year, we know that the 100 students who want to train next year, they will have a home, and they'll have food, and they have trainers to train them. And while at it, some of us can now be focusing on what does it mean for us when we want to say, let's go deeper. Let's try create systems change in the industry. And especially because the work that we do is pretty much targeting the tech ecosystem, the tech industry in itself. And to create change, systemic change, you need to understand that space that you are in. And you need to start having uncomfortable conversations with that industry. But then you can't do that if you have to keep every day looking for money to actually be able to feed the students tomorrow. And so for me, looking at it from a participatory grant funding, grant making perspective, and what multi-year grant funding can do, it means that it allows us some level of freedom to actually go ahead and innovate, or basically execute on the, do some research and development to ensure that our programs are growing, we are doing as much as we can with the little that we have, or we are able to actually go deeper when it comes to impact. Yeah.
Thank you all, of course, making such a good case for equitable funding relationships and funding. And I would just add, as a as a grant maker, sometimes I want to just say to funders, it's also like a much more joyful and easier way to fund, right? Like I'm not spending hours back and forth on tiny budget lines on a project with organizations that we fund. I'm getting to hear about the big systems change ambitions and the things that are getting stuck and how we can help and the things that are going really well. Unrestricted multi-year funding is actually, I find, having worked in philanthropy, a much more enjoyable way to fund and a much more effective way for funders as well. And I think sometimes we don't like speak that out, that I bet if more funders tried it, they would stick to it because it's a much more relationship, humanity-centered way to be in relationship with your partners. So we've talked, and we're kind of getting towards the end for Q&A. So I'll just put a reminder to the audience. We've gotten a few questions in the Q&A function, but make sure to keep them coming. So we've talked about the reality on the ground. All this kind of rhetoric in the sector about proximity isn't really shifting dollars yet. Maybe a little bit here and there, but not in a meaningful way. And then the ways that equitable funder relationships can really accelerate your work, and how participatory feedback processes can help create those equitable relationships. And I'm curious to kind of dive into this topic is sometimes a bit of a Pandora's box. Talking about grant making criteria in particular, or investment criteria, do you all find that those can sometimes be very funder driven and out of touch with the reality you all face on the ground? Linda, we've talked about this extensively since we've known each other. Are there certain criteria or kind of due diligence processes from funders that you feel really frustrated by, or that are really out of touch with your reality on the ground?
Yeah, I'm gonna just start off video to make sure that everyone can hear me. But yeah, I think when it comes to when criteria and participatory grant making, especially with funders, we've seen some requests, and I think this is one of the biggest, I think, always the monster in the room when it comes to working with our organizations. It's scale. Everybody's like, scale, how many numbers, just as Françoise said earlier, like it's all about numbers. It's all about how many have you taught, how many have you impacted, and all that stuff. And so everybody comes in with, tell us your plan for scaling. Tell us, like, we want to scale, we want to fund you, but then we want to make sure you're reaching more numbers. And so for me, I usually throw it back and ask, but then do you want to listen to me and understand my understanding of scale? Because your understanding of scale is numbers, but then my understanding of scale is very different. And in this case, I'll give an example. AkiraChix, we train young women in technology, and our approach, our model is very holistic. It's pretty much very engaged, and you have to actually ensure that all the students that enroll at AkiraChix graduate and get placements in the tech industry. We have one of the highest placement in the industry, which is 85% placement of all our graduates. And so when someone comes and tells me, you know what, why are you training 100 and not training 1,000 per year? And I think you could do better with that, because when you look at the youth unemployment crisis in the African continent, we need more young people skilled. But then why am I training 100 and not 1,000? Resources is one of them. But then I always say this, the youth unemployment crisis is not just a crisis that is solved with a mass market solution. It's not like we are doing a vaccination campaign where let's go vaccinate everyone and we'll have ticked the numbers. No, that's not how we approach the youth unemployment crisis in the African continent. And so whatever we are doing, it's pretty much, it's a multifaceted approach. I mean, AkiraChix has to understand the industry and understand what are the gaps in the industry when it comes to female talent, and then look at it and ask ourselves, the African continent right now, tech is the fastest growing industry, but then how many jobs is the tech industry creating every year when it comes to, like let's say software engineers and things like that. And based on that, if we train 1,000, will they actually get those jobs in the tech? So is the tech industry creating those 1,000 jobs if we will have taught 1,000 kids. And so when I look at it, and so those are some of the frustrations I have with funders, because they're like, yeah, if you've gotten this kind of, like traction and impact, then you can train 1,000. But I'm like, no, listen to me, because I actually need to talk to the tech ecosystem, understand what they need, and then figure out how do we actually train and ensure that we are feeding the tech industry with the kind of talent that they require. Because every year, universities graduates, many, but then where are they? We still have a youth unemployment crisis, yet we still have skilled youth who have no jobs. This is because there is lack of communication on both ends. So if you're going to do systemic change, then the funders need to always understand that we who are closest to the ground have to do the work to understand the problems of the people we're trying to help out, which is pretty much the tech ecosystem. And then for us, look at the young people who are out there with no skills and figure out how we match we connect the dots. So we pretty much are like an intermediary between people with no skills, so give them skills, and the people who are looking for talent. So I feel like for me, it's just based on the fact that if we could just find ways to fund us to just understand our understanding of like the word scale, and maybe sometimes we don't even use it scale. We don't call it scale. We just call it growing our impact. So it's not about like numbers, because scale is currently characterized by multiplications of 10, 1,000, 100, and things like that. But then for us, it's more on deeper impact than it is just numbers. Yeah.
I resonate with all of that. We intentionally avoid the use of the term scale at the African Visionary Fund. We talk about growth and acceleration and impact and systems change, because I think maybe philanthropy in particular needs to acknowledge the parallels between an obsession with scale and a capitalist, obsession with growth, that we're always kind of like driving towards this. And what does sustainable growth and sustainable scale look like? And if it's not working in capitalism, it's probably not going to work in social change either. That's a little bit of a sidebar. As we kind of get close to Q&A, I want to kind of transition into it in just a few minutes, and I see a lot of exciting questions coming in. So I'll ask this of each of you, and I'll start with Linda as we wrap up. What are, a few key takeaways that you think would help create more equitable funding relationships and help funders put into action their kind of stated commitment to local leadership?
So I think in terms of feedback, which I think it's something, we always say feedback is a gift. And I think when we look back, most funders will always ask for feedback for, like the process. Every time, especially when you're doing reporting, most funders will ask for feedback. And for me, I always ask myself, is that feedback just gonna live in a document and that's it? Or are we actually going to try and discuss that feedback and just go deeper and figure out what exactly that the feedback that we give as grantees can actually be used to improve either the processes or of grant making, or just the relationship between the grantee and the funder. I think when it comes to like participatory grant making, it's both ways. It's all of us being involved to make the process better. And while when the process of actually getting the grant is aligned with each one of us, then it makes it easier for us to actually grow our impact. For both of us, impact is in both ways. It's just not for the organization, because the more impact the organization has, the more impact the donor has, because then the fund also has their own reason as to why they want to fund this work. They want to fund impactful work because they also want to see their own donor organizations actually growing. And so for me, I look at it in both ways. And so there's more work to be done when it comes to relationship building, which is just normal way of building relationships and not just for grant making, but then spending time to try and get to learn what each each of us, so the organization and the leader themselves, like just getting to know where we are coming from when it makes some sort of decisions. I've found better relationships, especially with some of our funders, just based on the fact that we check on each other, even sometimes via WhatsApp, just checking in and how are you doing, and you know, that just builds the relationship. And at that point, I will tell you something that, oh, I will not have to wait for it to be during the reporting period. It was just based on the fact that, oh, we actually are checking in on each other. And I think when we start building more trust with each other before we even think about putting money, then it becomes easier for both sides to actually trust each other, the grantee to trust the donor, and the donor to actually trust the grantee, in such a way that even when situations come up that are harder to manage as a grantee, I know that I have a sounding board when it comes to the funder that I actually, we have been talking here.
Thanks, Linda. Françoise, how about you want to jump in? A few takeaways for the audience of how funders can put their commitments into action?
Yeah, I think funders, there have been many meetings talking about participatory partnership. But as other people have said it, I think they still need a huge humility so that they can put that in action, actually. And when I say that they should trust us, of course, it doesn't mean they should trust us. They should just trust us. We know we have to be reliable. We know we have to be we have to accept to give feedback as we had promised in our contracts. That means even grantees, we have responsibility so that we can be trusted. And I really loved the way, like during the whole process, I told to AVF that, you know, we have got huge thousands of VSLAs, and we really don't need, we need an application which can help us monitor those VSLAs. And I love the way AVF believed in me and give us more money so that we can have that application. But for somebody whom you have seen, I mean, for a donor whom you have seen that he doesn't trust you, you can't even tell that donor your weakness. You understand? When you have seen that the donor really trusts you, you tell all the weakness, and for that, they can help you to grow the organization, to grow the impact we're looking for. And for both of us, at the end, we are successful, because even the donor, I know some donors, they ask money for other donors. So if they have a nice report saying that SaCoDé have done this and this because of the money you gave us, and we have done even more than what we had promised, I believe it's even successful for the donors. So for me, as a takeaway, I'm going to repeat again, could you please, funders, listen to us, trust us. Thank you.
Yes, I would just like to say that in terms of commitments to action, my call is that it's important that we begin to have more collaborative rather than transactional partner relationships. Because when we do have collaborative relationships, then a funder and a partner are able to be vulnerable to each other and share the good, the ugly, the tough, and find, you know, collective solutions. And then the issues of trust will be, you know, addressed. And of course, we shall be able to learn mutually, because both of us need to learn from each other. So I know that sometimes I struggle with bilateral donors when it comes to collaborative versus transactional partnerships. But I really appreciate that for most of the family foundations and other foundations, it's more collaborative, and the issue of multi-year unrestricted funding is something that I really want to appreciate all, you know, the foundations for accepting to invest in visionaries. And I call upon the bilateral donors that it's important to shift from a transactional one where it's more around numbers to one where it's more around transformation, one which is more around deeper impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. As usual, I have learned so much and resonated with so much of what you all said. We have a lot of really good questions. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them. I'm just going to try to go from the top and see how many we can get through. So this one came from Ash, and anyone can jump in on it. Are you all seeing big dollars available to your organizations in this kind of shift towards proximity? There seems to be more small and early stage funding for local groups. Are you finding pipeline for funding fit for scale or growth?
I think in my experience, I would concur with Ash that there's more opportunities for startups. And that's why I reiterated that sometimes you find yourself in a desert, in some kind of drought where the funders that are coming through have a budget limit, and yet you need to be able to grow your impact to, continue to engage with communities. So I feel that the restriction of how much money your budget is also a hindrance to growth. And I have no solution for it, but it's something that I'm seeing in my own reality.
Thanks, Monica. I just want to jump in on this one too, because this has been something I've really seen in the last 12 months in particular. I think there's always a need to invest in early stage organizations, and there's really important ecosystems like the Siegel Family Foundation Network, Ashoka, early stage, and kind of organization builders or fellowships exist. But in the last 12 months, I've seen a ton of new funder-driven versions of that pop up, which to me says that those funders don't believe they can give big money to African organizations, right? Like they're facing this new pressure, and their response is to say, we're going to do smaller grants. We're going to have a special small grant portfolio for African organizations. You can give big dollars to African organizations. And if your instinct, when you realize that you're not funding local leaders, is to start a smaller grant portfolio, you should kind of investigate if that is actually based in some real bias and honestly racism about the capacity of African organizations. I get asked about capacity far more fundraising to get money to African leaders than fundraising for anything else. And that is a real bias problem. There is a huge absorption capacity of African organizations. So the idea that you need to give small grants to fund local drives me insane, to be honest. So thank you for that question, Ash. The next question, how can we improve our feedback mechanisms in order to improve the rhetoric? Do you believe that these mechanisms should come from organizations on the ground and not from the grant makers? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I think that is pretty much what collaboration is about. It's just being able to engage with the donors, engaging with the grantees to be able to figure out what's the best way in terms of getting feedback, what works best for both parties. So it's not coming up from one side, but then it's just both of us having to understand when it comes to this process, this is why we do it. And so when I understand this is how things work, this is how you think works best, then I'm able to figure out how, even when it comes to giving feedback, I'm able to. So it's more collaborative. I think that's what, in essence, I think would make sense. So it's not one side just being the one giving. So it's more like equal. So all of us can give each other feedback and make the process much more easier. I'll give an example just with the AV fund. Being able to be asked, do you have some time that you can give us feedback on our grant making criteria? A year after it was founded, I was like, sure. I mean, I'm not a grantee, but then it's like, yeah, fantastic. I'd love to be part of it and just see how the process will keep improving every year as new grantees are added. And so just being every fund reaching out for me was like, oh yeah, sure. It means at least the voice of of me as a grantee actually does matter. And so it means that, for me as well, is being able to get to understand, oh, this is why you have to be an organization that's been existing for 2 to 3 years. Okay, now I get it. Like I get to understand why, and not get to a situation where you're applying for to a funder and because you didn't know, like, the reason behind the 2-year or 3-year, you're confused or not happy because of how the process went. But then when it's participatory, it makes it easy for us to understand why or what I need to do as a grantee. Yeah.
Thanks, Linda. A lot of the other questions have to do with participatory grant making, and one of them is the question is, can you define participatory grant making? So I think that might be a good place to start before diving into the others. So I can share kind of how the African Visionary Fund defines it, and then if any of you want to jump in on how you think about it from the other side of the equation. We dove in to some research on participatory grant making last year. There's a really incredible community of practice that is at participatorygrantmaking.org. It's a global community of practice. And in my experience, it's actually a spectrum. I think sometimes it's conceptualized as like, there is one way to do participatory grant making, and that is it. And it's actually a real spectrum of processes that you can build in slowly, that you can go, and do an entire full participatory grant making. So sometimes it can look like community-based participatory grant making that involves, a diverse set of community members, intergenerational, across gender, ability and disability, kind of everything one together, making decisions collectively about where money goes and what is invested in. At a funding level or from a kind of an institutional grant making level, it can be things like participatory processes that create feedback loops about different parts of your process in addition to where money goes, and the representation and who is part of grant making. Participatory grant making looks really different in different places, in different contexts. So my experience is that it's a real spectrum that's really defined by the people closest to the pain being closest to the power. So the people closest to the ground being involved. So there's lots of participatory models that are really at a community level. There's ones that involve the organizations that will be using the funds to make decisions, and kind of everything in between. So I'll now pitch it to you all if anyone wants to jump in on how you define participatory grant making.
Yeah, for me, participatory grant making, yeah, it means actually for me it's about power. It's about power, and we like 4 years ago we are used to. Now it's really changing. We're used to those donors who think because they are bringing money, they can tell you to do anything they want. Because they have the money, and we used to accept those kind of grants. And later we realized, let's say an example. I can give you an example. A donor will tell you, okay, I'm giving you money, go and buy pads and bring it to the girls. And then you tell the person, I know those girls. You're giving me money for pads, and those are disposal pads. I know that they need more than that. Not only they don't have pads, but they don't even have knickers. You understand? Because I know that when you were talking about proximity, it means we know in reality what's going on in our community. We know our people. So even though you are bringing money, please, can you let me tell you what is the issue among my community? Instead of saying, I'm giving you money and I want you to do A, B, C, D. For me, really, it doesn't work. And that's why it's very important, even though you're giving me money, can you please listen to me? Because I know if you really want the impact you're looking for, listen to me, because maybe I can advise you the way to do things which can bring more impact, more to what you are really thinking. Maybe you did your research on the internet about Burundi, but you really don't know Burundi more than me who are Burundian. I know Burundi more than you. So please listen to me, and I can tell you how to do things so that we can, both of us, reach the impact, because I need your money, you need the impact. So it's good we listen to each other. Thank you.
Thanks, Françoise. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So another question about participatory grant making. Some participatory grant making approaches use 1-year starter grants to get to know a partner. If the goal is multi-year funding and trust, what are your thoughts on initial 1-year grants that reduce funder risk and may feel transactional?
I think I have mixed feelings around that question, but I think it's just useful to know that there is hope for multi-year grants. And I think it also depends at the stage that the organization is at. And I do believe that sometimes it's important just to move with an organization, to start with an organization from where they are at. So if a funder said it's 1 year, but you have hope that after the 1 year, there could be a renewal for 2 years or 3 years, I feel that's more, collaborative than transactional, because the funder is able to give you like a long-term plan. So it's up to you as a partner to work through what the funder expects and also to build that relationship. Because even if a funder committed 3 years and I don't do my part in terms of making good use of the money, building good relationships, putting systems in place, it doesn't make sense. So I still feel that even if a funder gave us 1 year, but there is room, for growth, room to tap into the unrestricted funding, I feel it's still a journey of collaboration.
I totally agree. I would also, the thing that my response when I read this question was like, how do you define risk, right? Like, I think funders have to remember, one, that they're giving away money. So we all need to just kind of be a little comfortable with risk, because that's the name of the game. And how are you defining it, right? In my experience, if we all are kind of on the same page that proximity matters and that locally led organizations are best positioned to deliver impact, then they should actually be the least risky investment you can make, right? Like, funders kind of have these perceptions of risk that are very much founded in global north ideas about what organizations should look like or sound like, or what systems they should have in place at what time. But if you fundamentally believe that impact is more sustainable and more likely in a locally led organization, then it's actually a very low risk investment to make multi-year grants to local leaders. Okay, I'm getting a warning that we only have 2 minutes left. I'll do one more question, but we'll just answer it really fast, I guess. How do we get funders to move away from drilling down or insisting on scale and focus on deepening impact? How do we get them to understand that the idea of scale is subjective? Any quick 2-minute or less thoughts on that one?
I just think, go ahead, Françoise, it's okay.
Yeah, I think once you, in the beginning, all the discussions have gone well. I mean, before you even get the money, you have said how you're going to implement that project. It's very easy to say how the project is going to be implemented, so that you really tell the donor that you really want that growth, not just numbers. As I was giving you the example, for me, nowadays, I really tell my donors, we really need to do a baseline study on our beneficiaries so that we can be able to measure the impact instead of measuring the numbers. Otherwise, it will be a project of numbers. Yeah, you can talk in that. We still have 1 minute. Yeah.
In Africa, we say that when you want to communicate, you need to sound a drum. So we should continue sounding this drum collectively as visionaries, so that ultimately all collaborators, all funders appreciate that this is what we want as visionaries. So let's get the drums rolling.
That's great, and probably a pretty powerful way to end this very fun session. This was truly a joy to just pitch questions at you three brilliant women. And to everyone in the audience, thank you for the great questions. I've been glancing over occasionally and seeing chat activity on my other screen. I haven't been able to read it, but I'm excited to go back and see all the comments. So thank you so much, and go to these wonderful women's profiles and go to their organization's websites and support their work, because it's really incredible. And we'll see you all at the rest of the Future Summit. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.